Welcome to the Collage Podcast, a production of Feed My Sheep. Feed My Sheep is a nonprofit in Temple, Texas that has a goal of feeding people that are hungry physically, spiritually, and emotionally. In this podcast, we discuss Scripture, and our hope is that you would be fed spiritually through the reading and discussing of His Word. We're glad you're here.
Well, hi, friends. Welcome to the podcast. It's been a while since I think the four of us have been in this room together, so I'm excited to continue our conversations about the life of Jesus with these friends. So we got Jeff, I'm Roy, Karen, and Jonah, and we're going to get started with our first text this morning. We're going to be looking at Jesus in this particular miracle of feeding 5,000 people. And so we're going to start with Jeff reading Matthew chapter 14, starting in verse 13. Go for it.
That evening, the disciples came to him, and he said, "This is a desolate place, and it's getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the village and they can buy some food for themselves." But Jesus replied, "That is not necessary. You feed them." "Impossible," they exclaimed. "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." "Bring them here," he said. And then he told the people to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he looked up towards heaven, and he asked God blessings on the food. Breaking the loaves into pieces, he gave some of the bread and fish to each disciple, and the disciples gave them to the people, and they all ate as much as they wanted, and they picked up 12 baskets of leftovers. About 5,000 men had eaten from those 5 loaves, in addition to all the women and the children.
All right, so I'm going to read a parallel passage in Mark chapter 6, starting in verse 30 and ending in verse 44. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." And so they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed, he saw a large crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups in the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up into heaven, and he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 baskets of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of the men who had eaten was 5,000.
I'll be reading in Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 10. When the apostles returned, they reported to Jesus what they had done, and then he took them with him and withdrew by themselves to a town called Bethsaida. But the crowds learned about it and followed him, and he welcomed them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who needed healing. Late in the afternoon, the 12 came to him and said, "Send the crowd away so they can go to the surrounding villages and countryside and find food and lodging, because we are in a remote place here." And he replied, "You give them something to eat." And they answered, "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all this crowd," for about 5,000 men were there. But he said to his disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of about 50 each." And the disciples did so, and everyone sat down. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. Then he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over.
And this passage appears in all 4 Gospels. I'll read from the Gospel of John, chapter 6. It says this: Sometime after this, Jesus crossed over the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. And then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he had already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have just one bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up, "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." And there's plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. And he did the same with the fish. And when they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, and let nothing be wasted." And so they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him a king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. There it is.
All right, so in Mark, the Mark passage, there's Mark really spells out that Jesus and the disciples need rest and are trying to get to a solitary place. And the people, and I don't want to blame the people here because, they didn't know. They just could see where they're headed, and so they go to meet them. So my question is, does Jesus have bad boundaries? I mean, I think in our way of like talking about things like, burnout and workaholism and all this, we talk, you gotta establish boundaries, and then a boundary you don't enforce is not a real boundary. You need to take care of yourself. I'm sure we all have used the illustration of the in an airplane, if the cabin depressurizes, they always tell you to put your mask on first, so you can't help others if you're not taking care of yourself first. And so he gets to this place where they intend to rest, and there are thousands of people waiting, and then he just he takes what his original plan was and just lays it aside, and okay, the people are here, and he had compassion on them. They're like sheep without a shepherd, and he just gets back to work,
Yeah. Like for me, I'm going to give probably the wrong answer in the world that we live in right now. Is I would say it's an absolute spot on right way to be. He went with intentionality of going, I am tired. And then even you look at the passage that Jonah ended with, the John one, okay, they were like, hey, you're going to go do this. He went further away. So rest still was coming. Yeah. And so mine was, we go, man, I need to be alone. I'm so wore out. And he was. And they intentionally went to a place that is desolate. How many times do we have to hear that in this passage? Yeah. There was intentionality of what he did, but what trumped the intentionality was the need.
Yeah.
The need. And so like in it, Jesus, you can't see Jesus going, hey, dudes, I'm here because I need a rest. I just did some incredible stuff. I came purposely away from y'all, so take it to the house. Because I'm tired.
And you see the disciples, at least in 3 of these passages, I believe, the disciples are like, hey, send them away. Mm-hmm. Like, we get it. We are tired too. And we know you're tired. Get these people out of here. Let them go find something to eat, and then they can come find us again.
Which is a way of like taking care of them, paying attention to the fact that like, hey, I don't think these folks have a plan, and they're gonna need to take care of themselves. So yeah.
Which is so interesting that they just all these people followed Jesus to a desolate place, didn't bring anything with them. Of like, and I know it's the ancient world, and like we don't food.
No, that's not an ancient world thing. I feel like that's. I see so many like parallels to just my life and my own tendencies in in this situation. The fact that people have not thought ahead
Well,
and planned ahead.
Hold on. Now here we're going to get to mine, which is, did everybody not think ahead?
Well, except for the one little boy about
That's
a
right.
Lunchable.
So there's one person in this whole story that was prepared, correct? And what does he do with the little? There's only one out of all of these people that did not need the miracle of Jesus.
Yeah.
And what does he do? He hands his stuff over to somebody
Yeah,
else.
yeah, he needs the miracle after he has chosen to give over
He gave it away.
his own meal.
Why?
Yeah.
So you go on this. So we go, oh, nobody came prepared. No, one did. You know, one did, a kid. And then he had it and he'd be just fine.
So I think what's interesting, and this is for me, it's been a while since I've read, these texts, and maybe never have read all four of them together at the same time.
Yeah.
And I was always like, oh, like, of course, they get the loaves and the fish from the little boy. Like, that's how the story goes. But John is the only one who includes that aspect of things. The others are the disciples have them, or they go and find them somewhere, that sort of thing. John is the only one where the little boy gets the credit. And is this a connection to, it's well believed that John was probably the youngest disciple, and almost like he was beloved by Jesus, like a little brother, like something like that. And is John maybe making a parallel between himself and this little boy? Is John writing himself into this story and saying, hey, that little boy, either it was John who had the loaves and the fish and gave them up, or he just connected with him in that John gave up everything to follow Jesus and trusted him as a little boy.
And does it change the story? Like, to me, it changes the story a ton. Like the first parts, it doesn't change the outcome of the story, but the first three, hey, the disciples go out there and they find this guy had a scrap and this guy had a scrap and this person had some scraps, and we put them all together, and Jesus does this with it.
Yeah.
That's one story. Okay, and it's an incredible story, and even then the John version, to me, is so much significant of life, like, and why it matters to me. He had everything he needed, but yet he gave it over to Jesus with this, he didn't even give it over, I promise, because the disciples didn't know what was going on, to go, hey, if you just give it to Jesus, you're going to be able to feed everybody here? No, they're just, hey, he needs these things.
Jesus is saying he needs this. We don't know what he's planning to do with it, but
Maybe Jesus is just going to eat them because he's
Could be.
hungry.
Yeah.
And it could be. Like, he may have given all this up just under the understanding of, in his little mind, I guess he's hungry. Mm-hmm. And then I'll go without so he can have, maybe. Okay? And then mine, like, that is significant to me. The miracle is the significant moment. I get that.
Yeah.
That we turn food in. But for me, that moment of humanity where this person who'll be just fine.
Yeah.
You know, in the society we live in, everybody's like, hey, take care of you
Yeah.
and let everybody else figure out on their own. And if there's enough left over after, if the boy, then out of this, in our world, how it would read now is, hey, you eat 4 loaves of bread and half a fish, and then whatever else you can share to everybody else.
Let me ask you something, Jeff, because you run an organization that serves, what do you serve? You probably serve 5,000 meals in a week, or maybe 2 weeks,
Yeah. I mean, it would take 200 a day, so 1,400 a week.
Okay.
So,
All right. So in a month. then. Yeah.
That's
all right.
more than I serve.
Yeah. You're right. Okay.
Really, a year probably.
Yeah. Is there a criticism that gets lobbed at you? I'm fishing because I think, like, do you get the criticism that are you enabling people?
Why are you just feeding people?
Yeah. I mean, can't they? If you did not do this, would that not motivate people to take care of themselves and to be more responsible and figure out how to feed themselves? Do you get that criticism?
we could. I mean, that's a logical step in the world that we're in. And even like in this story, like for me, is the act that somebody didn't have something to eat for a day. People can go 30 days without food. It's not even significant to not have 2 days without food. I mean, so like, was the act so much that he fed the people because they didn't have food that day? Or was it because he provided for them and it was benevolence and it was just love?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that act, did he enable them to follow him further? Well, yeah. I mean, like they now have food so in it, like that logic is, to me, that's some people would use, you enable, whatever that word means.
Right.
I don't even know what that means, but you do. I mean, like, well, yeah.
I enabled this person to, to have the energy to walk around. And,
Could be, yeah. And then they had, man, they went at night and they used drugs, so that somehow we caused that because they ate something at lunch.
Yeah.
Or like, they ate here around other people who love and care for them instead of eating out of the dumpster today.
Yeah. There are two phrases. One is only in Mark, but what was common is he saw them and he had compassion.
Mm-hmm.
There's this emotional response Jesus has, but I really love what Mark says, that he saw compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd, and so he began to teach them. What do you guys make of that? What Mark is saying, but then also like what that resonates with in life and ministry and in the work that you guys do.
What do you think, Karen?
I think so. When I hear all four of these together, the in my mind, like linchpin verse is Jesus had compassion on them. I think when I come to any text, I always want to ask, what is this teaching me about God? And that to me is the thing that stands out, that Jesus had compassion in this moment. Whether they were hungry, you got to wonder, was his own stomach growling in that moment, and he's tired. I'm sure all the disciples are tired. Yeah. And he's thinking, I'm going to go rightly get some rest. But instead he has compassion when he sees them, when he gets to the other side. So I guess in some ways you could say he did get a little bit of rest, whatever it took to get across the lake and them to run around.
So long as he had his buddies rowing.
Right. One of I'm thinking a lot about the boy and him bringing that and Jesus using that. And I love the inclusiveness of the kingdom, that Jesus, he could have just showed up and given fish and showed up and given bread, given anything he wanted to in that moment. And they all could have looked down in their pouches and found food. But instead he used this boy that came forward. And one of the greatest quotes that I read in just reading about this story, it was from Scott McKnight has this Everyday Bible Study series where it goes through all the books in the New Testament and kind of gives questions and stuff after, like a everyday commentary kind of. He quotes a guy named Frederick Buechner, and he says, he's talking about the word blessing and Jesus giving thanks, and then it says he blessed them. But the quote is, "You irreversibly convey into my life not just something of the beneficent power and vitality of who you are, but something also of the life-giving power of God." And I like so much of that I see in this, of Jesus is blessing them in that moment. He's taking the gifts of somebody else and blessing the masses with it. And I think in some ways that's such a picture of what ministry should be for all of us. Like, what do we have? What can we come together and what can we use in a way that blesses people both physically, but also in a way that shows them the power of God?
Yeah.
Agreed. For me, this passage is significant. That right there. Jesus, we can't forget the fact, if he's going to do a miracle, okay, for not for show, but man, he turned the grass turned into fish and everybody ate, and then the rocks turned into bread and everybody ate. That's more baffling, like even this. But why is it even stated in this one little sentence that the boy handed over everything he had to Jesus? Jesus took it, blessed it, and then out of that, an abundance came to this whole flock.
Yeah.
So if you would go, hey, what does it mean to be a minister? I'd say, hey, might want to do Little Boy 101 over here. And there's your manual what it means to be a minister to a flock. The boy did nothing other than hand over everything to Jesus, and Jesus broke it and blessed it, and then many, many were fed. And so I'm going, like for me, nothing, and I get the miracle, but I'm like going, man, that's spot on. And then I also say, Jeff, are you willing to hand over your loaves and fishes?
Yeah.
And then we would go, no, because I got to take care of this. He
Me
might have had a
first.
brother with him. He might have had a sister with him. His mom might not have had food. He had food.
Yeah.
And you're going, okay, because we look, oh, that's cute. He did that. He might have gone without.
Yeah.
We don't know. He doesn't know what Jesus is going to do at this moment, but still he trusts and he hands it all over.
It's an
Or the
interesting-
disciples shook him down.
Okay,
or they shouldn't have. But
Drew's like, give it up.
I think, Jeff, I think that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful and challenging thing to contemplate as folks. We find ourselves in situations of, a big task and meager means, because I find myself acting more like the disciples here, where there's a situation, and my first realization is that I do not have in myself or in our church, in our organization, in our resources, we do not have what I believe this situation requires. So we go into problem solving. If we can if we can help them find the right person, if we can, call and convince the right person to help, if we can, whatever we can do to kind of get through this situation. And the disciples start to grasp at straws. You've got maybe 10,000 folks in front of you, and what they suggest is actually really impractical. But it's like the only thing they can come up with. Those villages did not around that area, and this is Craig Keener's commentary that I was reading and researching this. Bethsaida, Capernaum, places, none of those towns together could accommodate 10,000 people. Their populations combined maybe around 3,000. And then in I think it's John. No, it's Mark here, where it says the people sit down in the green grass. Mark actually wrote the color of the grass. Okay, so maybe it's spring. The wheat harvest is in the summer. So by the time spring comes back around, those cities, if they have wheat stores, they're low. They've gone through the winter already, getting ready for the next summer harvest. The disciples they're offering a suggestion that maybe it seems practical to us, but I think even the original readers of the story would have been who know this geography would have been like, they don't know what they're doing, and they're thinking of what is in our power. We're pretty sure it's not going to work, but it's the only thing we can do in our power. And that is like, that just really hit me in the forehead.
Yeah.
I do that. That is immediately my reaction when faced with a problem, is even a problem that is beyond the scope of what I could possibly accomplish. But my initial reaction is, let me go into problem solving mode. Let me see if I can't engineer a solution. It's not to remember the power of God. So yeah, I just want to contrast the disciples' problem solving efforts here with, Jeff, what you're saying, this boy who doesn't know what's going on, but there's an amount of trust in giving over what he has to Jesus.
And the first move of the disciples is not an act of faithfulness, but it's an act of self-efficiency. Well, we don't really have anything, so the logical thing to do is to send them away. It's not
Almost like compassion, but compassion that lacked the kingdom perspective.
Yeah.
Like, we have compassion. They look tired. They've been here all day. They're probably hungry. Let's send them home. Let them rest. Tell them you're not going to be talking. They can come back tomorrow, but lacking the vision of what the kingdom could provide in that moment.
But then Jesus does something different. And these texts, I think, have to echo to us Psalm 23 of what Jesus is doing. The Lord is my shepherd, and I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me besides still waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Jesus is David's shepherd. That is enacting this text that David writes about the abundance and goodness of God, and how Jesus is the shepherd who calls the sheep to lie down in the green grass with him, and he provides for them in an abundant way that they could not expect, that he prepares a table for them, and their cup is overflowing from the acts that he has performed among them. And I think it is a actual enactment of this text that David wrote so long before this actually happened.
I also see echoes back to the Exodus, just them breaking manna and stuff like that. But then backwards to that and forwards to the Passover meal. I wonder if in that Passover meal, the disciples' minds were going back to this moment when Jesus is giving thanks, breaking the bread, blessing it over them. Were they making any theological connections at the time of the miracle of this and the miracle that, and him saying, this is my body broken. So if you literally watched me with some fish and bread, multiply that, and I'm telling you that my body is similar, how much more will it be multiplied?
I think definitely John he's making some connection, not necessarily in this text, but the text following, when he's in another place and the crowds are following, and he turns to them and criticizes them, like, you guys are following me because you saw me, or maybe you're even with me, when I, fed you all miraculously. But, you're looking for signs and wonders here. I am the bread of life. And now, curiously, John does not actually have a Last Supper institution, but the language that he's using there is, it does seem Eucharistic, for sure. So much so that some Eucharistic liturgies, I believe the Catholic Mass uses this phrase when consecrating the bread, consecrating the body. You are, the bread of life. It uses that phrase in their Eucharistic.
There's a lot of ties too with that I see just with the idea of fellowship and meals, and Passover meal is coming. In some of the commentaries I was reading, so quite a few people think that this crowd was headed to Passover on the way. So if you picture the map in your head, Galilee is like up and to the left. There's a river straight north, the Decapolis straight up and to the right. Right below Galilee was Samaria. And then below that was Jerusalem. So they could have just gone straight down to Jerusalem, but most of them wouldn't go through Samaria. Yeah. So they went up to around this lake and down through the Decapolis and then back over west to get to Jerusalem. So some of what I was reading was just practicality when he was done teaching, and they're going up and over to the river, that was their natural way to go. And that it could have been a little bit like just reading about the geography of the region. If it was like not a windy day, it could have taken longer to take a boat to get across than it would to walk that upper side to get where he's going, but they could have been like, oh, sweet. Like, we're going that way anyway. We're going to catch him on the other side. This is great. But were there any deeper theological questions going on in their mind of they know that they're going to Passover, and then here's this breaking of the bread. Eventually, we have the story of Jesus and Passover. And was this a moment that they thought back to in just his provision and abundance and compassion that he had on them later when they heard about the Passover meal?
Yeah.
And why doesn't he let them make him king in John?
Well,
knowing they're going to make him king by force is what John says. He flees.
So I do think some of that has to do with John the Baptist. He was beheaded right before this, and they're going through the Decapolis, which, if I remember right, wasn't that
Where
where
Philip the
was ruling
Tetrarch? Yeah.
Yeah.
Herod's brother.
Yes, thank you. Herod's brother's ruling that area, and so I wonder if that was a bit of strategic humanity. Like,
They march him into the Decapolis as their king.
I need a little bit more time, guys.
He did.
Like,
Yeah.
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 Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This will not end well, and it's not time yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The echoes of this. First of all, Karen, I think you solved a mystery for me, and like, it was how were there actually that many people? When, that's a lot of people. But if you have folks all from the region traveling and kind of caravanning together, making their pilgrimage to Jerusalem, that really makes a lot of sense. And they've caught en route, they've caught moments or opportunities to hear from this teacher, Jesus, and they love this, or they're challenged, they're intrigued by him. And then you have this other opportunity to hear him again, to meet him when he gets to the other side of the lake. But that, I even reading this again, just, man, were there really that many people? And but yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense, and it fits the timing of the season. Being, if Keener's right and this is spring, then we're headed to Passover. Thank you.
It does make me question, though, and I don't have a good answer for this. If they are traveling for Passover, why didn't they have food with them?
Well, that's the story that is in their minds in preparation for Passover is the Passover story of the Exodus, and there's some preparation involved in that. Baking the bread and all that.
Well, in the language, they're in a desolate place.
Yeah.
Like.
And then the people, of course, you mentioned manna, right? That in Israel's escape, their provisions run out, and so the Lord then provides for them miraculously. And this story, and I think Jonah, you mentioned it too. I mean, this story just really echoes this story of Israel and God's continued provision and learning how to trust God with provision and all of those things. Yeah.
I forget my lunchbox at home a lot. And maybe it was like divinely ordained that everybody just forgot their lunchbox that day so that they could see the faithfulness.
Kind of like the blind man in John 9, this situation was sort of set up so that the power of God
could be shown.
Yeah.
I still really love the inclusion that Jesus has with this boy. And I was thinking a lot about that, and just with any miracle, Jesus could have done, whatever he wanted and created however much abundance he wanted to in that moment, but that he chose to use what this boy had. And for something else this week, I was in Genesis and just reminded of the calling on Adam and Eve to be co-creators in the kingdom, and to take care of the land, to cultivate it, and just pairing that with what Jesus did with kind of the least of these. We don't know how old he was, but this young boy status wise. It wasn't like, go call the leader of the local synagogue. We're going to see what he's got and honor him even more. He's taking a young boy and using what gifts he has in the kingdom, and how that was such a picture for me back to the garden and what got messed up in the garden. Jesus is bringing that kingdom back and saying, like, here's another glimpse. We're going to use your gifts. You're going to co-create with me, and we're going to do amazing things with you.
I'm with Kay on that, and that I can't not look at the story and think of David and the Philistine. Okay, so how did David get picked? I mean, he went to the least tribe in the least village in the least family, and he was the least of the little boy.
Yeah.
And why? And you go, because if they see this, they will know the power of God.
Yeah.
And they won't think it was man who did this. So like this, you're going twofold. I'm like, look, again, why did he pick a little boy? And why does he even denote? I mean, because like that, you go, hey, go get the leader of the synagogue over here and tell him to get some food out here. Mm-hmm. It's done. I mean, like, not done, but and that's pretty good. That's good leadership. And in mine, like, I kind of think mine is the times that I've found myself, like if I go prepared on a backpacking trip, I've never been without food, okay, because I've gone prepared. Those moments you just get caught up in something that's bigger than you. Oh, that's so cool. Look at these moose. I'm going to go follow after them. And next thing you know, you're doing this thing because you're caught up in something. And then all of a sudden it hits you, oh, crud, it's dark. Mm-hmm. And where have I got myself to? And so mine is that you had 5,000 plus people that possibly, I don't know, got caught up in something going, I've got to go wherever this is. I've got to go find it. Because I just saw something amazing, and they chase after it. Then all of a sudden, the only thought was not to go, but like a ravaged 12-year-old young lady who's Taylor Swiftified, and she's like, she's going to drop everything. If Taylor Swift is in Temple, Texas, she's not even going to try to figure out, how do I get out of this? I just got to go see her. Mm-hmm. And this is like on steroids of that. All these adults and everything had witnessed something so incredible. Then they get there, and they're just sitting there, and they're like, oh, we're seeing him
next.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And now what? That, for me, it makes the story even more of going, now they're just sitting there because they saw something incredible. And then out of that, then I'm with you, like Jesus could have gone, okay, ready, clouds, start raining down all the food. Here we go.
What's interesting is, like, Matthew notes that what starts the fascination is Jesus healing the sick. That right. He's healing the sick, as he always does. And people are just observing, and then it's like, it's late in the day, and nobody's eating, and it's like, it's not like they're just fascinated and wanted to follow Jesus. Maybe it was like he started healing people, and it was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna watch him heal people, and then it's just all of a sudden, wow, it's 6 o'clock in the evening,
I also love the detail. Matthew, Mark, and Luke show us that there were 12 baskets left over at the end that were still full, and just the picture of that, I mean, it's kind of cliche, but that Jesus didn't give just enough. He gave more, but I think that also foreshadows too, again, that kingdom coming. And in that first century, for Romans to have a meal or whatever, it was a good host always had more than enough food. It wasn't, okay, I've got 5 people coming, I'm going to have, 5 chicken breasts, exactly, or whatever. Like, it was, hospitality was seen as an overabundance, and it was a good hospitable meal if there was far more than they would need culturally. And I love that. Like, I think Jesus knows that. And I think he's taking even something culturally for them and like, get ready. This is just a glimpse of the kingdom that's coming.
That's right. So mine, like this, can you imagine the disciples? So then where you got to follow this one, Jesus said, this is my body broken for you. Okay. So then you got that. Okay. So they don't get what's going on in here. But then He says, why am I doing this? So you can have life and life abundantly. I am the bread of life and life abundantly. So then they would go, abundance, where have we seen? Remember that time we had nothing and we had 12 baskets of food left over? They saw it. I mean, like somebody like me, I'm visual. Oh my gosh, that abundance. He didn't come so you could have life that's sustained, life that is of the meager existence, abundant. There is bundles and bundles of baskets of food left over if, not this, but if you hand it over to where it needs to be.
That makes me actually think back to God's covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15 and 17 of him saying, you will be a blessing to the nations. Just the 12 baskets, the 12 disciples, the 12 tribes of Israel, but God saying like, here, this is for you, but the overflow, again, you get to be co-creators and bring others into and use this abundance and be a part of this beautiful story.
And then even that one, Abraham, hey, guess what? This is what's going to happen to you. Okay, I need you to go over here. Okay, things start happening, and then guess what? The plan doesn't quite look right.
Yeah.
Doesn't quite look right. And you could have bailed right then, but he said, okay, what did he do? The same thing the boy did. The one thing that he had, he gave over.
Yeah.
And then God said, no, I'll provide everything for the sacrifice. And you're going, okay. So interesting. You start looking, and then the 12 baskets left over. God, 12 tribes, 12 baskets. You start going, these ain't accidents.
Yeah.
I wonder. So if I were teaching like an intro to ministry class, and one of the things that we see in this text is that the disciples, okay, at the beginning, and I really resonate with their silly problem solving, but Jesus does send them to facilitate. Go find their. They connected with that boy. They found the little bit that was there. They facilitate the sitting into groups. There's been some speculation too among scholars about what meaning there might have been in separating into hundreds and fifties, and I know that one of your listeners is going to go, oh, that's a military thing. And yeah, I've read that too, but I don't know what the significance of it is. But it's the disciples who have to facilitate these things. And presumably then when he breaks the loaves, no, not presumably, he gives them to the disciples to distribute. So the disciples that are going, handing people this bread from Jesus. And I think the question I would ask, freshman seminarians or first-year seminarians might be something like, what does this teach us about, what ministry, church ministry or nonprofit ministry or the ministry that is common to all Christians as part of our calling to follow Christ? What does this teach us? If the disciples are here a model for ministry, and Jesus is training them to be the foundation of the church, the apostles. So if they're modeling something here for us, what is it that they are modeling, and what can we then see in terms of what it is that we do when we are ministering to people?
The bread belongs to Jesus already.
Mm-hmm.
That it was his, and it's just your privilege to give it away.
That's it.
Yeah.
And do it with compassion.
Yeah. So like that, we could get confused, and even it would feel really good for the disciples because they solved a physical need for the people, and then they could, after the first person, when you go in the crowd, because what is everybody in the crowd going to say to the disciple? Oh, thank you. I was so hungry, and you fed me. Oh, and then by the time they get to person number 5,000, they're going to start believing they were really the ones who fed them. And so mine, so if I would say to the seminarians, I would say, read the story and imprint it in your head. You provided nothing other than what Jesus gave you to begin with.
Yeah.
You fed nobody. You just gave them the food that was Jesus. Do not get lost in the serving of the food and forget who truly was the food.
And in fact, you have the boring part.
That's right. Yeah.
So
The
don't try to make it more interesting than it actually is.
Yeah.
Do
Beautiful.
it the way, and do it the way that Jesus tells you to do it. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of books on leadership, and taking leadership wisdom from the business world and from entrepreneurs and all of that, and trying to adapt it into church leadership principles. And there is good wisdom there. I'm not disregarding that. I learned a lot from that. But the primary instruction on ministering to people as a church leader or as somebody who's going and visiting, your friend in the hospital to pray with them, whatever ministry is looking like for you, that Jesus does tell us how to do it, with humility. The lords of the Gentiles rule it over, but so shall it not be with you. To be a leader is to be a servant. The first will be last, the last will be first. I just think that there's,
When you got to feed some people, shake down a little boy for his Lunchable.
yeah, for sure. I'm definitely feeling some challenge just reading this with you guys and like some of my own thinking patterns of late.
I think if they're, as somebody who is not employed by a church, but had many conversations with those that are, I think a encouragement I would have for pastors that are listening is to hone in on the compassion that Jesus has, and that juxtaposition of the disciples wanting to take care of them. There's this humanity that's rightly involved. How are we going to do this? This is what their needs are. Like, let's strategize. But Jesus's driving emotion in this moment is compassion on them. And so for pastors that are feeling weighed down about all the things that they've got to do and schedule out and get this person here and this done, and I got to write a sermon in the middle of all this too, and feeling the weight of, and maybe even frustration of their job and what, feeling like, does it matter? Are people even listening? And that can quickly turn into a frustration with the sheep and their neediness. And I think something here that stands out to me so much is Jesus's compassion. And so I think for pastors out there who are listening, or all of us that pastor in any given moment of the day, is, are we having compassion towards that person in front of us? What is our number one emotion towards them?
And like that, think of how different this. So, ready, the story changes none. If we have a sentence in there, Jesus laments the people and expresses to them why did they come so ill prepared. Then he breaks the loaves and feeds them. The whole story changes.
Yeah.
The miracle doesn't change. The boy doesn't change. But
Jesus asked,
is,
are they going to sell this for drugs
that's
tonight?
right. Yeah, and so the compassion, and you look like that when he did that. So out of the single act there, the trust that the boy handed over all to Jesus, huge. But Jesus' compassion to those, and mind you, because he was on earth, I'm not going to suppose I know Jesus' emotions or feelings or anything. He purposely went to a desolate place. He was intentional about trying to get away, but his response, even at this, you got the disciples who are not getting the picture. So you got frustration there. Oh, this is my leadership team. Oh, why does my leadership team not understand what's going on? This is the new direction. We got these new things we're doing at the church. Nobody gets it. Everything's going blah. Okay. He could have gone very frustrated with them. He doesn't. He tried to get away from the people. He can't. And then his response is, and I love this, we know he ate because he had physical needs, but what's his first thought? Make sure they're fed.
Yeah.
And you're going, golly, it's so spot on, and it's so simple in a way. And I like what Jonah said. I mean, the disciples, just hand out the food. Hand out the food.
Well, I think a lot of that actually goes back to feed my sheeps. We see people, not problems. And that's exactly what Jesus did in this moment. He saw people and not problems.
I want to, when I'm with you guys, my mind kind of goes to ministry because that's sort of my, context a lot of times. And because you're the folks I like to talk to about ministry stuff because, because we have some of that in common. Here's another scenario though, that it's not, this isn't a church congregation. It's not a big, this is an ailing elderly mother, or spouse, and you're a caregiver for that person, and you love that person, but the needs are constant. And I know that the folks who are being caregivers in my life and in my church, there's this sense of just overwhelm. The problem is too big. The problem isn't going away. This ends, maybe this ends in death. And compassion then is like, we talk all the time about compassion fatigue. Like there's a level of emotional, is it enough emotional pain that we kind of naturally start to build some calluses just so that it's not so emotional all the time. How does this story speak to that situation?
I think it speaks spot on. Like in that, because how do you think, I would say to that, the disciples, emotional wore down. Jesus says, hey, take care of this. We can't, dude. What are we going to do? There's no possible way, okay? So, hey, this person has cancer. You're supposed to watch them. What can I do about it? There's nothing.
Yeah.
It's way too big, okay? So then they get that. They are, like you cannot, there's no way you could look at the story and not at the start of it see the disciples getting a little frustrated.
Yeah.
What do you mean? We can't do anything. Dude, it's going to take a year's worth of salary from a whole bunch of people. We can't do this. What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. So then out of that is to acknowledge that them, the disciples, who are doing amazing things, they're wore out. They don't even want this task that's at hand. But then out of that, they listen to what Jesus is really asking them to do and believe that he's able to do what he says he's going to do. And then what Kay said out of this, really what they served, the deal was not the fish, it was not the loaves, it was compassion and care. Mm-hmm. And then out of that, so like your hospice workers, what do they say on the backside of it? Oh my gosh, you cannot, when they walk through the valley, Jonah said that when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me also. When they walk on the other side, and then you get a glimpse at the end of the story, when they're full, there's no way one of the disciples is not sitting there going, oh my gosh, I cannot believe Jesus allowed me to see that and allowed me to hand this out, which I had nothing to give. Nothing to give. I could do nothing in this story. So for me, to that caregiver, is that simple truth in that moment to be able to understand it's all right to say the sentence, I have nothing to give.
Mm-hmm. When I was a pastor, which is interesting to say, it's good to say on the other side, but went to a conference and it was like a director of serving for a megachurch who was leading this breakout session about like engaging the church in serving, and said they had done this reached out to the church, anybody who hadn't served in the last 6 months, and kind of engaged them in a conversation. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I'd love to do that. And so I did that at the church that we were at. So ran some reports and found like anybody who had not served in any capacity in the last 6 months, and sent an email and said, hey, I want to invite you to a conversation and see, are there ways that, you know, you could serve that you're not. Plenty of good conversations about people that are like, you know what, yeah, maybe I'll jump on this team or that team or whatever, ready to serve. A lot of conversations of, hey, my dad died of COVID, and I walked with him through that whole process, and I'm just not ready.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I'm caring for my mom who is slowly dying of cancer.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I just had a really traumatic birth and am really recovering from that and caring for a newborn at the same time.
Yeah.
And it was these really cool and intimate conversations. And there was no judgment in the initial outreach. It was very engaging and inviting. And it created a lot of really good conversations to be like, you're doing more than anybody else.
Yeah.
You're like, screw coming and serving coffee.
Yeah.
Like, you are doing this
Just
every
bless you.
day.
Yeah.
And it was like, let me pray for you. And it
Yeah.
was just the willingness to ask and say, hey, what does this season of life look like for you? What does serving look like right now? And then getting to have those conversations, it was really forming for me. And there were people in the church that were like, thanks for asking.
Yeah.
And thanks for this conversation, because I felt bad because I haven't been doing that. I've been getting the emails. I've been hearing the announcements. I've been seeing, the posts.
Yeah.
And I feel bad because I'm not doing that. It's like, no, you're doing the most.
Yeah.
I think there's times where our ministry and service behind closed doors is far more pleasing than being up in front of a crowd and preaching or whatever that may be. When I think about that question, I was a caretaker for 4 years. My dad lived with us, and the last 8-ish years of my mom's life, I helped. I didn't live with her, but took her to radiation and chemotherapy. And then at the very end, was quite intimately taking care of her. And I had been in ministry and stepped down. And I was so heartbroken to step down. I still remember that meeting. I was working for Young Life, and I sat down with my leaders, and I could barely even get the words out to them that I was stepping down, because I loved that ministry so much. But I was doing it to go take care of my mom. She had just been put on hospice, and I knew I do not have the capacity to do all of this at the same time. And so right now my ministry needs to be her. And so stepped down out of that ministry completely and took care of her. But I remember there being a frustration on my part of the need, and it was far more than I could handle at the time, both just physically demanding and emotionally, to watch someone you love waste away in front of you. And I remember, though, having a moment where I felt like this is super intimate and vulnerable, but I was changing my mother's diaper, and the loss of humanity in that moment and just the raw emotion. But I felt like God was whispering, this is more important to me than anything you've done the last 5 years. Like, this is where I am, and this is my work. This is kingdom work right here. And it just wrecked me in the best of ways. We often think, ministry is how many people are you preaching to, or how many people are you podcasting to, or, whatever that looks. We base it so much on numbers. And over in the Gospels, we see that in some ways Jesus is more about the people. And we see his compassion here to feed a crowd. But we also, right before this, like you were saying, he's healing, and we see his individual compassion I imagine him grabbing each face right before this and saying, I came for you. How can I heal you in this moment? And it's such a compassionate God that we serve. But I do want to say, I think there is important to have discernment and remember that we are human. We are not Jesus. And there are appropriate times for us to pull away too and say, I need rest for my body. I think that's right. We see Jesus do that. I
He
mean,
did that in
yes.
the story. It's like at the end, he's like, all right, I'm going to go really high up the mountain now by myself.
I mean it this time.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful picture of his humanity in that moment too, that even Jesus didn't constantly in front of the crowd ministering to them. So yes, we have to have discernment of when I'm giving, and when do I need to pull away. But I would say for our listeners that maybe find ourselves in those moments, the point of pulling away and what we see in Jesus's life, in him pulling away and what we should be doing is not a focus on strategizing. Where am I going to get this next meal? Where am I going to get these things? Those aren't bad. Those are part of our humanity. But every time Jesus pulled away, he went to the Father. And so in our moments of rest, when we're pulling away and we're saying, God, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to take care of this person anymore. I need a break, or I need help. Or maybe you're a pastor saying, I don't want to preach anymore. It's every week. I'm so done. I feel burdened by this now. Your focus in that moment has got to be on the Father and what he can provide in those moments.
And like that, you'd almost wish that there was a moment you could look to, and Jesus is like, there's sarcasm in this, like where he would say, I don't want this.
Yeah.
Take this cup.
Take this, I agreed. Take this cup of suffering from me. I don't want it.
Yeah.
But not mine, but thine be done. And to be able to have that pause like this, I mean, like, come on, the disciples, when everybody's, I mean, there's thousands of people there. They're in the leadership of it. Everybody in the crowd before we get to the miracle is squawking at them going, hey, man, we're here following y'all. We're hungry. Do something. And they want to. I mean, they intend to. You wouldn't want, these are compassionate people that have dropped everything to follow this guy. We pick on them a little bit. They have dropped everything. They're following this guy. They're banking a whole lot. They missed the mark. They ain't getting it. Okay? And they're like, they want to be part of the solution and they want to help and they're here. And you go with it, and there'd be frustration and going, I can't do anything. Like, what in the world? I gave up for this. And dude, you set me up to fail. I'm out here with thousands of people, and then I come back for you for answers, and you say, do something about it.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's nothing we can do. And you go, but like Kay said, at some of these moments where that sentence, I can't.
Yeah.
And then in that whisper, they go, I know.
Yeah.
This is my job.
Yeah.
I love that Jesus asked, isn't it Andrew that he asks, you give him something to eat?
Yeah, he took it.
But he's from there. It's like his hometown. I love almost, you kind of wonder if Jesus had a little bit of twinkle in his eye of like, you feed him. This is your hometown. Yeah. But I mean, I say that jokingly, but the burden he must have felt in that moment of like, dude, I'm from here. There is nowhere. Like, we have nothing to give them. And even so, it would take a year's wages for us to get the money to feed this many people. And I think in some ways, in a kind and gentle way, Jesus is sort of like, that's the point.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the point.
So then, like, the question at hand on that is, so many pastors, so many people, so many of us sit there with the empty basket and going, I can't do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying, good.
Yeah.
Never asked you to.
Yep.
Hand out the stinking fish that I'm going to give you.
Yeah.
And we whine, I can't do this anymore. I can't do. And what Kay said, well, and I like this, you cannot not look at that part. Everybody says, oh man, he does this thing and it's good. Yeah. And people's response, because they're a flock, they're sheep, and they go, oh, this is him. This is the king. We want more of him. Yeah. And we're going to take you this. And what does he do? I'm going higher. Yeah. I'm going on up here because I got to be alone. And he didn't go to be away. He went to go be with the Father. That's where the only rest and assurance comes. And so I'm going, you want to look at, like, this should be Seminary 101 right here. And it may be. I don't know. I haven't been, so I don't know what it is. Or
Yeah,
isn't.
what hey, man, I'm not criticizing my seminary. They were teaching me some really good things. I just didn't actually learn them until way later, or have not quite yet learned it yet.
And I'd agree on that one. Like, every time I read it, I realize how little I have learned and how little I truly want to know. And so I want to be the disciple that can hand out the fish, but do I want to be the disciple that truly understands I don't have the answers? Do I want to be the boy that was prepared enough and I packed a lunch? Yeah, I do. We got to. That's backpacking 101. Do I want to truly be the boy that hands over everything?
Yeah.
I was prepared. These other fools weren't. So you're going, man, out of that, there's a lot in the story that should call us, and no matter where we are in our faith walk, we're somewhere in this story. I mean, I'm a lot of times I'm all the people, maybe at one time. I'm the ones in the audience, and I am the ones who want. I'm every part of it, and I'm going, and so I do like that, but for me, the ultimate place is you have to end up going, finally, there is some peace and understanding the truth of, I can't do this. You know, and then the answer, sitting in a little podcast room, is easy. You were never asked to do that.
Yeah.
And for me, there's comfort in that. Also, there's some, because I would say the world that we're in, and not just here, and we're not talking physical, it is hungry, starving to death.
Yeah.
And then we would look in this room and we'd go, there's no way. We're in little bitty Temple, Texas. Okay? It's little bitty for all y'all out there. I mean, like 100,000 people, whatever. That's little bitty. I mean, whatever. We'd go, hey, guys in here, let's go feed everybody in Temple. There's no way. There's just 5 of us. What in the world are we going to do? I can't. And, you know, well.
Yeah. Thank you.
So that's it for me.
I think that we've, really been able to concretize this in our own lives. Is there anything anybody needs to say to finish landing this plane? Yeah, I'll just say for me, Jeff, thank you for putting some of my feelings into words there. And for me, the thing that I'm hearing here is that, dude, just trust in me. So the trust in Jesus, trusting that He is way more compassionate than I am. So if I'm feeling that compassion fatigue, it's okay, because these folks are not in my care; they're in His. But then also to just do what He says. Do what He says and let Him worry about the outcome. Thank you, friends. I hope and pray that this conversation and this text is as enriching to you as it has been for me, I think, for all of us this last hour. So God bless you wherever you are. And keep trusting the Lord. He's more compassionate than you. And so it's okay if you're feeling that fatigue from, some time. And just do what He says and see if there's not some abundance that's unexpected in that. God bless you. The Collage Podcast is produced by Bobby Jeffers in association with Feed My Sheep. Hosts are Jeff Stiegel, Karen Smith, Jonah Fox, and myself, Roy Rhodes. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform you're listening. Or like, share, subscribe, and get in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. We'd love to hear from you, so shoot us an email at digitalmedia@feedmysheeptemple.org. And may you be nourished for your journey with God.